Hello, and welcome back to Let's Get Lit. In today's episode, we're going to be going over Book 10 of Paradise Lost. We've made quite the journey, and we saw that Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit. So what happens next? Well, let's figure that out, shall we? This book starts out in heaven with all of the angels upset. The angels that were guarding over the Garden of Eden went directly to heaven after this moment, and all of the angels gathered around the throne of God and told them what had happened. God told the angels who were keeping guard, "Don't worry, it's not your fault." He told all of the angels that he knew all this was going to happen because it was planned. God knew Satan was getting out of hell, and he was going to go straight for the garden and corrupt man, and man would fall. He said that he could not step into the situation and prevent it from happening, because he gave them free will, which means that they had the choice to do what they wanted to do. He tells everyone that he's going to send his son down to be the one to judge and to administer their sentence. God's son says that he will go down and he will give his judgment, and he will also have mercy upon them as well. He says God can trust him because he will do what is right. He says that they will face their sentence, but the third will not, because he already has his conviction and he's already fled back to hell. But he will get his justice in the end. After the son says this, he goes down to earth into the Garden of Eden. As he's walking through the garden, he calls out for Adam, asking, "Where are you? How come you do not come to me? Are you not pleased with me? Or would you rather have solitude?" He then tells them to come forth. Adam and Eve come out so they can speak directly to the Son of God. Milton notes that they are going up to him. They do not have joyous looks in their face, but instead they look full of guilt. Adam says he heard him in the garden and his voice, and he was afraid because he was naked, so he tried to hide himself. The Son of God says, "How come you seem so dreadful to see me? You've heard my voice often, and you have not feared it, but rejoiced in it. Who told you you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I told you not to?" Adam responds to the Son of God and says, "O heaven, an evil sent straight to this day, I stand before my judge." Adam goes on to say that he cannot lie. He knows that he ate from the tree that he was not supposed to. He said that he was not going to throw Eve under the bus, and says that she made him eat it because he ate it of his own free will, and that now he knows he has to bear his punishment. The Son of God responds to Adam and says, "Is Eve your God? Why did you put all of your trust in her instead of me?" Then goes on to ask Adam, "Do you think she were higher?" He goes on to say that he gave Adam Eve as a partner, but that he was not supposed to worship her or take her advice over what Adam knows to be right. He then looks over at Eve and says, "Woman, what have you done?" To whom Eve responds that the serpent beguiled her, and she ate. One of the first condemnments is that the Son condemns the serpent to only be able to crawl upon its belly for the rest of eternity, that there is not immunity between woman and serpent, that the serpent shall eat dust for all the days of its life. The final commandment that the Son gives is that Adam and Eve have to toil and sweat and grow from their ground all of their food, and that the earth is going to be barren and going to be dry. He also says that from the ground he is taken, back to the ground he will return, after he had finished his judgment. But before he goes away, he does pity Adam and Eve standing before him naked. So he gives them both clothes and animal skins to hide or cover their nakedness. This is seen as a redeeming factor to both Adam and Eve, and it hints that God is going to send his Son to forgive man for their sins. After this, the Son returns to heaven and leaves them both. Then the story shifts into hell and sin and death sitting at the gates that are wide open. Sin begins to talk to death and state that she has had this interesting feeling welding up inside of her. She says that she believes Satan has won his cause and has caused the downfall of man, because she's starting to feel strength grow inside of her. Death responds and agrees and says yes, he can feel strength rising up in him as well, and he can feel the power from what is to come. Both of them agree that they should make a pathway from hell to earth, because all the souls that are going to be condemned have to come here. They begin to work together and begin creating a bridge from hell through chaos. Death and sin work their way to create the pathway through chaos that Satan had used on his trip up to earth. Milton says that they create this track very quickly and very durably. And once they had gotten out of chaos, and as they were finishing up the road, they actually run into Satan. Satan recalls how after he had had Eve eat the fruit, he watched as she gave the fruit to Adam. Then he concludes that after all of this happens, he watches the Son come down and give his punishments to Adam and Eve. After this, he then starts to make his way back to hell. This is when he runs into Sin and death. Sin essentially says, "Congratulations, you did it." And she said, "I knew you were able to accomplish it because I could feel strength inside of myself while in hell." She says that hell could no longer hold their bounds, and then now such fatal consequences unite these three. She says, "Let God still reign up in heaven," but now Satan was the one to successfully pervert his new creations. And now God has no greater foe than Satan himself. Satan responds and says, "Yes, now I am the almighty antagonist against the almighty king." He says that he has successfully created one realm, hell and the world, and that he will go back to hell and tell of all his minions the success that he has had. He then tells Death to go to Earth and that this is their new kingdom, so that way they can subjugate man to their will. He finally tells them, go and be strong, and then dismisses them. Satan then uses the path that sin and death have created and goes back to hell. As he enters hell, he decides to fly back to Pandemonium and to his throne. He does so invisible, that way no one can see him. Then, when he catches everyone off guard, he ascends to his throne and is able to be seen. From there, all of his fellow counterparts begin to praise him for what he has successfully done. He then goes on to tell them about his journey and how it was treacherous and how he had to carve his way out from the gates of hell through chaos and finally up to Earth. He then tells them he was able to corrupt man, and now he's combined the world and hell together. As he finishes saying this, he's expecting to hear chants and roars of excitement, but instead, he hears hisses coming forth. For just a minute, he's concerned, but before he can really even know what's going on, he begins to feel himself changing. His arms come close to his ribs, his feet start to intertwine with themselves, and he realizes that he's being turned into a serpent, and he begins to slither away. Everybody else is shocked at what's happening, but before they can even think themselves, they start to turn into a multitude of snakes. As everyone is being turned into snakes, suddenly there seems to spring up a tree that looks like the tree of good and evil, and the fruit that the tree of good and evil had. So, all these serpents who were hungry and thirsty climbed and coiled their way around the tree to get to the fruit. But when those that were lucky enough to bite into it quickly realized the fruit was not fruit, but instead filled with ash and soot and tasted horrible. Next, the story shifts back to paradise where we see Sin and Death. They made their way to Earth, and now they're both observing their new landscape. Sin talks to Death and basically asks him, what do you think, now that we have dominion over this place? And Death answers, and says essentially that this is paradise for him. Then Sin replies and says, okay, go forth and feed on herb and fruit and flowers and fish and fowl and beast. She said, anything that your scythe mows down, it will take to death and spare nothing. She then tells Death that she takes part in human life and presides over their actions and thoughts and everything else. And she says to make sure that you don't take man down too quickly, but instead let them play out for a little bit, and when the time is right, strike them down. After this conversation, we then switch again to God the Almighty, who is seated in his utmost high. God tells everyone that now mankind has fallen, and that these devilish and horrible entities have now ruled. He says that this is the consequence of man's actions and of his free will. However, he also says that he has a plan for saving them and that his son will be the one to cleanse them of this curse. He says that when the time is right, he will send down his son to pay for the transgressions of mankind. They will have a second chance at redemption and at salvation. After saying this, all of the angels immediately go into songs and hymns of praise. They say that his ways are righteous and decrees all of his works fantastic. God then tells the angels to go down and change Earth. He tells the angels that they will need to change the axis of the Earth, and this will help with the different seasons. He tells them that by all of this change, it allows for the Earth to go through cycles, and that through violent storms and other necessities, the Earth will be able to go through an ebb and flow of life and death. He said that when there was no sin, the Earth didn't need to be on its axis because it was in paradise. But now that man has sinned, this is the way it has to be. We then see that Discord, whose daughter of sin, was introduced. A Discord's presence on Earth turns beast against beast, fish against fish, and fowl against fowl. Now, hunter and prey were a part of Earth's system. However, the animals still fled man because they were scared of him. But if they did see him, they would glare on him in his passing. All of this has happened. Adam can see and can feel and knows he's responsible for all of this. Adam has a very long conversation with himself. And in essence, Adam is very upset by what has happened. However, he knows that he is the reason that all of this has happened. It was his choice to eat the fruit from Eve. It was his choice not to heed the words of God, of what God asked him. It was his choice not to obey God's command. Throughout this long discussion with himself, he says he doesn't know how he's going to bear living in the world and having sons who will possibly regret having him as a father, because they will know of his ultimate sin and how he is responsible for all future generations' downfall. He goes into a deep conversation of depression and how he doesn't understand why death just doesn't come right now and take him. That would really fix everything. If death were just to come in, take him out of his misery, then he really doesn't know how much worse things could possibly get. Eve comes close to Adam, and Adam is not happy with her. He essentially tells her that he doesn't want her near him at this moment, and then goes into talking to himself, but also to Eve, saying he doesn't understand why God created females, and how he couldn't just have had a male-driven world with male angels. He says that women are the downfall of man. This doesn't repulse Eve because she humbly lowers herself to him and proceeds with her thoughts. She then begins the regeneration speech, which essentially she begs of Adam to forgive her. She says that she was tempted by the snake, and then in doing this, when she was tempted Adam. So she tells Adam, Adam, you only sinned against God, but she sinned against God and man. So she really is the one that has the answers for her sin on Judgment Day. She also tells him that they don't know how much longer they have left on earth, so they really shouldn't be spending it hating each other. She then asks for his forgiveness. Adam, moved by her words, and then tells her that he forgives her, and that they are in this together. He then says that if he were able to, he would go right up to God and ask forgiveness and have all their punishment put upon his head. He then says there's no use in us going back and forth at who's feeling more sorry for themselves. Instead, they have to realize what they've done and move forward. Eve then states that all she can really think about is death, and how she thought that when God said they were going to die, it was going to be of that day. But instead, they now do not know when they're going to die and what death is going to be like. She says that maybe to spare humanity from it, they should remain childless or commit suicide. Adam immediately says no, and that did she not hear of what God had told them, and the fact that their offspring would be the ones to triumph over the serpent. Adam then goes on to realize that God was talking about Satan and using the serpent as a symbol. Adam also says that if they commit suicide or remain childless, that they will not be able to fulfill God's promise, and that Satan would have free reign over the entire earth. He then reminds her that when God was handing out their punishments, he also clothed them, which means that even in the moment of punishment, he still had mercy on them. And he said that the best course of action was to ask God's forgiveness. And hopefully through generations and generations of them and their offspring asking for forgiveness and repentance of their sins, maybe God will turn and provide some sort of solace for them and for mankind. Adam also says that with the assembly of clothes, they would be able to survive in this new world. He says that God gave them the knowledge of rain and snow and weather, and also fire. So they have the tools to survive. He ends by saying they should go back to where they were kicked out of, follow on the ground, and ask forgiveness. They do. They go back to the place, they fall down and begin praying with tears in their eyes, watering the ground. This is where book 10 of Paradise Lost ends. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Please tune in as we go over book 11 next. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. And as always, stay lit.